You're listening to the Business and Life Podcast, where 7 days a week, proven entrepreneurs share their success stories, failures, and give you true value on how you can build a great business and an awesome life. With your host, Micah Levis.
So, Shawna, thank you for jumping on the show. I'm honored to have you.
I'm honored to be here. I was very excited when I got the phone call. Thank you.
So I'd love to be able to jump right in and talk about what compelled you to do what it is that you do.
Well, I'm going to backtrack a little bit and tell you where my
please.
history has been, because I'm in a completely new space now, and that has its own exciting challenges and fears. But for the last 20 years, I worked in marketing and advertising. I worked at some of the most, the world's premier agencies, and I was a creative there. And what that means is like the advertising campaigns that you see on television, or if you're driving down the street and you see billboards, the newspaper ads, any of the digital campaigns, maybe some like digital products. Those were things that I built. Me and my teams would build.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. And so then, your background was specifically in the advertising world. Was it pay-per-click advertising? Was it more just actual, on the ground advertising? What kind of advertising was it, so the listeners can understand?
Yeah, so I initially started in digital. That was Digital 1.0. I worked in San Francisco, and I worked at this really incredible agency called Red Sky Interactive. And, we helped build the first Nike ID site. We helped build Absolute, Miller, Sutter Home. I mean, for a long time, I was like the beverage girl. And so this is sort of my indoctrination into the advertising world, was building digital presences for each one of these companies. And we would build these really cool interactive brand building pieces, things that would like reach out to our customers and build a link or bridge a link.
So caveat into that, bridging a link here. Let's talk about that bridge of link. Now, what are you up to?
Yeah, so I ended up, after 18 years, I moved into starting my own agency. And I got really excited about being my own boss, about setting my own time schedules. I was a new mom. I had a 1-year-old, and no longer could I travel at the drop of a hat. I needed to be responsible. And the best way to do that was to open my own agency. And so I co-founded an agency in Venice, California. And very quickly, our agency was called All Boats Rise. Okay. And very quickly we found success. And a lot of that was through relationships that I had built, because I had, worked in this industry for so long. And, once I moved on into my own space, people remembered me, they remembered my work, they remembered that I was great, and they started, the phone started ringing. And so we built this beautiful business, and within a very short time, we were, got to a place where we had 24 employees, and we built up a clientele roster that was very enviable. And what started to happen is, as we were building this success from the outside world, my professional life was going swimmingly, but my personal life, in my health specifically, was running toward a cliff very quickly. And I hit a wall where I couldn't go anymore. And, 18 years of exhausting myself and 18 years of running finally caught up with me. And so I ultimately had to take a step away from my agency. I ended up selling it to my business partner. And I spent the last 2 years trying to identify what was wrong with me, and then how do I get healthy. And so that led me to where I'm now, which is autoimmune awareness. And so I've spent the last, as soon as I discovered that I had autoimmune issues, I was dumbfounded to know that, I had been suffering for 12 years with these issues, yet no doctor could identify what was wrong with me. They just said that I needed to stress less and, relax more, but that was very ambiguous.
Did you really, did you backtrack into looking at your own life and realizing that, it was, for a while, us entrepreneurs sometimes look at that as like, oh, maybe I need some more sleep, right? Maybe I need to get, eat some more veggies or do some of the basics. I mean, did you start thinking initially, was it sleep deprived? Was it more just, hey, I need to kind of get back into realizing what's important? Or did it take you a long time to kind of start realizing that it was not just a typical, maybe stress or lack of sleep situation?
I mean, you're absolutely right. As an entrepreneur, I never wanted to pinpoint that maybe I was the cause of my issues. And it turns out that I was the cause of all my issues.
Superwoman. Yeah, you're Superwoman, right?
Someone, I could do everything. I could do anything,
what do you mean?
right?
Yeah.
what was really challenging for me was to identify that that it was not just a single item, because that's what we want in the world is like, okay, I want the smoking gun. I want the magic bullet. You know, like if I just take this one thing out of my life, or if I just do this one thing, everything else will correct itself. And that wasn't happening for me. And that was very frustrating for me, because as an A-type, as somebody who's a problem solver, as somebody who expects and demands results immediately, like the fact that I couldn't sleep a little bit longer and then catch up and be fine with it, or I couldn't just like eat another kale salad and then like bounce back, was very infuriating to me. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs do that, right? Like we're like exhausting ourselves at every chance we get.
We sincerely, absolutely. Everyone I speak to is, I think that is the norm. And people like you now, I think, and there's others, maybe there's more of a movement in terms of understanding, okay, let's kind of take a back seat and realize what truly matters. If you don't have your health, what do you have, right? How are you moving forward with anything? And so there's so much, obviously the health movement has been so big over the past 10 years, which is great. But I think that from an entrepreneurial standpoint, 100%, we grind, go, and feel guilty if we're not sometimes. And that's where that kind of feeling kind of kicks in. So we forget, or we just, oh, I might be a little sick, but sometimes mind over matter. You just get through it, but you realize that you're just killing your body a little bit, for sure.
I think it's also, if you're an entrepreneur, you are eternally optimistic. Sure. And also, I think that there's a little bit of pride in this. So as an entrepreneur, I mean, egotistically, I think I'm a little bit better than a lot of people at my craft.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I truly understand how that sounds, but you know, that's the reason why I started a business, because I thought I was excellent at what I did, and I thought that I had something unique. And I think that that's not too different than any other entrepreneur. And so when you start to get sick, you're like, well, I can't be sick because, you know, regular people get sick. I don't get sick. And you know, regular people need 8 hours of sleep. I don't. I'm special. I only need 4. I don't need to eat breakfast or lunch. I could power through because I'm special. And somehow you glorify these things into being badges of honor rather than, you know, seeing them as detrimental, or maybe not even sort of like, you know, actually being like, okay. And, you know, I remember being, as part of, you know, a larger agency, whenever people would take a day off, or they would actually go on vacation, I would think like, oh, well, they're not putting in their weight, or they're not pulling their weight. Not realizing that like that actually was going to make them a better creative, or that was going to make them have better ideas, is because they were seeing the world, or they were experiencing something outside of their head.
You're absolutely right. There's so many people that forget that the mindset needs to be, it can be more creative and positive if you actually have some rest. I mean, it's crazy, right? Like we think of rest as like a luxury. And when we read so much about the grinders, and you talk about people when they're waking up, I personally wake up at 5 a.m. And I hated the mornings, right? But I learned through the processes of it, but I also make sure I get my butt to sleep early enough too, so I can do that and get some sleep and get to the gym and get the mindset ready and hopefully press record or you know, run with the companies that I own. But when it's all said and done, I think sleep is becoming more and more of a necessity versus a bragging point of not getting it, right?
Absolutely.
There's so many people like, oh, I'm the man, or I'm the woman. I can do whatever I want because, you know, I only need 4 or 5 hours of sleep. That's, you know, maybe you got to go to bed a little earlier and get I'd love to get 7-8 hours if I can. What do you get personally right now? How much sleep do you get?
Right now I need 8 hours, and I have, since 13 years old, I called myself an insomniac. I'm using air quotes here for anybody who's just listening. I called myself an insomniac. I'm like, oh, I just don't sleep and I don't need sleep. And, you know, so from 13 until 40, I literally slept. Sometimes I wouldn't sleep. I would just roll right into the next day. But I would say like on average, like 4 hours or less. And that depletes you. And it also, like from a physiological standpoint, your brain needs to sleep because it actually shrinks at night. And what happens is all of the passageways inside your brain get cleansed. They get washed. Oh, wow. And so all of those, you know, neurochemicals that we're using, all of the proteins, all of the minerals that we're using in order to make our our brain go. Those all need to be cleansed and then washed. So it's basically our wash cycle at night. And if we don't get enough sleep, you end up with brain inflammation. And I like to call it my stroke, which is I used to speak faster, and I used to have very clear thoughts, and I used to be incredibly articulate. And maybe I sound that way today, but there's times where there's giant gaps in between words, and I just can't come up with the idea or can't come up with the word quickly. And so I call that my stroke. And I'm like, okay, well, maybe someday I'll heal from my stroke. And I'm starting to understand now, like 7 years in, like I probably won't actually. And a lot of that I think has to do with sleep. It has to do with hurting my sleep cycles for so long.
Life Nation, we're all striving towards different goals. Maybe your goal is to finally quit the 8 to 5 grind, quit your job, or take the next step with your existing business. Whatever the goal may be, regardless of your reasons, if you are serious about taking the next step and finally trying to build the life that you deserve, the life that you want to live, take the leap of faith. Go to michaellevis.com and let's discuss your goals and life. It's 100% free. There's no obligation. It's MIKEOLIVAS.com. Schedule a quick call. I'd love to help. Yeah, no, I can see how, there's definitely too many times where too many times where I can assume now from the past of grinding and starting my companies in the past where I just wasn't I wasn't clear headed. Right. And you can feel it. You can feel it on a conference call. I'm like, I'm just not that smart today. What is it? and it's like, I know I'm intellect. I have the words for it, but I can't come up with them. And it definitely hurts creativity. Shawna, tell me a little bit about BS. Tell me.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the website and I love it. Like, what's the BS you're feeding yourself? Awesome, by the way. Call to action and or question to obviously make sure people reply to this. But tell me a little bit about this venture that you're starting up.
Yeah. So after taking a couple years to just reset, literally like mindset reset. Yeah. I'm going to back up. So when I discovered that I had these autoimmune issues, part of an autoimmune protocol is putting yourself on a restrictive diet in order to, reduce the inflammation in your body. Well,
first, maybe tell listeners what is an autoimmune disease?
Oh, that's a great idea. Yeah.
Sure.
An autoimmune disease is basically where your immune system is heightened and it's turned on so many times that it gets confused and it just stays on. It's kind of like the on switch is stuck. And it no longer attacks viruses, and it no longer attacks like maybe proteins in the bodies that are foreign invaders. It starts to attack itself. So it starts with your soft tissue organs. It starts with your joints. And for some people, like with people with an MS, it starts to attack the lining around your nerves. And so it turns out that I've got a handful of autoimmune issues, and I just likened it to, a lot of people liken it to like, oh, I'm just aging, or I'm just, I'm tired. I feel a little achy. And it's, like a frog being boiled in water. You kind of don't recognize it immediately, but then one day you have a really hard time getting out of a chair. Or
can you give some advice with your experience? Let's say we have some listeners that maybe I have that. Maybe those are some of my symptoms. How would someone know or find out? Is it possible for someone to find out quickly? Are there tests? Are there resources out there for someone to say, or for someone to go and either schedule an appointment with a doctor, or is it something that you kind of self-diagnose and realize, okay, I likely have autoimmune disease?
Yeah. So these are amazing questions. I'm so grateful for you. You're providing such an amazing platform for people. So yes, the symptoms are wide. There's 120 autoimmune issues out there, but the symptoms are generally the same, which is fatigue, achy joints, a lot of times skin rashes. So if you have psoriasis, or if you have sort of like dry patches that are constantly showing up, that's an autoimmune issue. Thinning hair, a lot of women lose their hair. Actually, depression is a huge one. People don't liken depression to autoimmune issues, but it's your body not functioning properly. So depression, fatigue, aches, pains, especially in your joints, the clicking, the clacking. If you have breathing issues, that's what a major symptom of mine is heart palpitations, breathing issues. And so if you have these sort of like strange symptoms that don't seem to go away, and they're persistent, now it's time to look into getting them tested. And you can get a test. It's called an ANA panel. That's A like Apple, N like Nancy, A like Apple, ANA. And in this ANA panel, they test for the top 5 autoimmune issues: rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, Sjögren's, I'm blanking Hashimoto's, and I'm blanking on the last one. But what they do is they identify if your body is making antibodies towards these items. And if it is, if these things are showing up, then either they can identify if you have a full-blown autoimmune disease, or if you're on the road to becoming or having an autoimmune issue. Because you can have the proteins present, or you can have the antibodies present, but not actually have that autoimmune issue, but you're like clearly headed toward that direction. And so you can also get panels done where you're looking at inflammation in your body. And these are not regular panels, so you have to request them from your doctor. And a lot of times doctors, they question you and they say, well, why do you want this? This is unnecessary. Sure. And a lot of times that's driven because it's not covered by insurance, or it's more expensive, etc. But I highly recommend that you get these, because knowledge is power. And so if you have things that are lingering, it's, you've been experiencing digestive problems for a long time, you can get, you can even get a GI sample and identify if you've got a lot of leaky gut. Leaky gut ends up completely, the link between leaky gut and autoimmune issues is 1-to-1. And the reason is because our immune system lives directly behind our guts, and there's one cell layer between them. And that's on purpose, because if we eat food that we're allergic to, our immune system says, hey, I need to get this invader out immediately, right? Because this is how we, as humans, like, this is how we ingest a lot of our pathogens. So
you're saying, for clarity purposes for listeners, if someone's saying, I might have this, it's 1-to-1. If you have leaky gut, you do have autoimmune disease.
No, if you have an autoimmune disease, most likely you have a leaky gut.
Okay, great.
Yeah, and so you have to heal the gut, and along with healing your mind. And that's the point I want to make, is you have to heal your mind as an entrepreneur, as an A-type personality, as somebody who's a go-getter. You can clean up your diet, you can get all the sleep you need, but if you don't reset your patterns inside of your mind, or how you address how you live your life and how you got that way, then this will never fix itself.
Great. I think some great takeaways there are: ask your doctor for an ANA panel. I constantly call our listeners Life Nation podcast, Business and Life. Without one, there's not the other, right? And so Life Nation here, it's listen, and if any of these symptoms and or possibilities resonate with you, go get an ANA panel. Ask for the ANA panel. Do your research. I don't know how many times we're Googling things that don't matter. Okay, let's go back and break things down and realize, wow, if I can feel better. If you have the itchy patch, if you have some thinning hair and other symptoms, obviously, that Shawna has dropped us on some great knowledge bombs here. I just wanted to break that down and make sure that ANA panel, right, Shawna, is what they would need to get to find out if they can get some more specifics on an audio, if they have some autoimmune diseases. Yeah, and you can, and there's also some inflammation panels. I don't remember the name directly. It's like a Fibrogen, I'm butchering the word. That's the reason why I didn't want to say it. Okay. But I can send it to you if you're interested in show notes. Yeah, definitely. I'll post it. There's a couple of C-reactive protein they can be looking for. So there's like 3 or 4 different panels they can look specifically. Great. Awesome. And Thanks so much. Yeah, and I just want to say, so the bullshit we feed ourselves, or I don't know if I can cuss, the BS we feed ourselves. Oh, okay. Yeah. Came from this idea, once I understood that it was the way in which I looked at the world that was causing so many issues, right? The reason why I was such a go-getter, and the reason why I was pushing myself so hard, was for validation, for achievement, because I needed success in order to define me as a person. And so I had to get to the bottom of that first. And once I could do that, then I could actually heal from the inside out. Awesome. I love that. I love that. I think sometimes people, how do you define success? I'm sure some of your clients will be discussing that. Maybe a big question about what is success to some people. And although too many people put that dollar sign in front of it versus a health sign, right? Or a life sign, I think. And so if you can combine and you can kind of bring all those together, great. But it's definitely important to have all of those. I really don't see how you can be unhealthy and feel successful. But again, I think
Yeah.
there's an angle there with the dollar sign in front of people's. Let's go back to the business side. Shawna, you built a company. You're obviously helping others to help diagnose and or work through autoimmune disease. Is that right?
Yeah. So my goal in life is to build autoimmune awareness to the level of cancer or heart disease. So growing up as a kid, cancer used to be something that was whispered. And now people celebrate it and they wear pink shirts and they run and they're excited, to tell everybody that they beat cancer or,
There's a lot
they're
of
helping
cancer
somebody.
shirts out there too.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
And so I want autoimmune disease to have its same amount of awareness. And I would love for it to be not just like part of the conversation, but the beginning of the conversation, because you can't have heart disease and you can't have cancer without an autoimmune issue, because cancer is an autoimmune disease. Like cancer is because our immune system is not working properly, and heart disease is because our immune system is not working properly. And so if we can have that as part of the conversation first and foremost, then I think we could be a healthier society. And so my big, hairy, audacious goal is to help and support 50 million Americans. And a lot of that is getting the word out, just becoming aware. And then I'm going to be creating a series of resources for them. There's a lot of resources out there. You can go and go to the autoimmune, it's AARP. No, ARP. Those are old people. What is it?
Yeah. Oh, that's right. Those are the retirees.
Those are the retirees.
That's right. Yeah.
Oh goodness.
You can send it to me and I'll post it on there.
Thank you. See, this is the stroke I'm talking about. Like, right? Stuff is not coming clearly to me. But there are resources out there.
Good.
But I would like to. I think that my specific gift is that I've built a multi-million-dollar company. I've had the employees. I've been the leader, and I understand the stresses that go along with that. And I feel that I can help people specifically put health before wealth, and still be an entrepreneur, still be a go-getter, but do it in a slightly different way so it's not detrimental to ourselves or detrimental to those around us. And so that is my goal, is to reach A-type personalities, to reach the overstressed, the overworked, the overwrought, and help them get the peace that they need. Well,
you're in California. You're not going to have you're going to have a shy amount of people knocking on your door there.
Yes.
So definitely, I was discussing with you obviously earlier before we jumped into recording here, but I live in Puerto Rico now, but definitely am from SoCal. I get it. I left it a little bit to kind of get away from the grind. Doesn't mean that I'm not stuck in my place here and still grinding all the time. But I think that you've mentioned something that is very important. Health equals wealth. And,
yes.
and understanding that, right? And realizing that let's back into a world of fulfillment, Life Nation, not just a dollar sign. Because when it's all said and done, how long are you going to be here, and you're not taking any of it with you. I think that's something to kind of remember. So let's talk about a little bit about your entrepreneurship, your entrepreneur journey. What do you feel you wish you would have known now, talking about health and wealth, prior to even, let's say you're starting day one, month one, year one, and you're Shawna 10 years ago and 15, 20 years ago. What do you wish you would have known now that you know all of this knowledge in the entrepreneur stuff?
Yeah, so I had started a studio once before when I was a little bit younger, and we reached six figures, and it was successful, but it never got to the level of success that I wanted. And what I recognized only years later is that the reason why it wasn't successful is because I held on to everything, and I wanted to control everything, and I wanted to be the boss of everything. Yeah. And so without help and support and spreading some of that, the responsibilities around, stopped me from making the bigger moves because I was stuck in the minutia. So when we started our second, or when I started the other studio, my partner and I, we looked at each other and we were like, we need employees right away because we can't wear all the hats.
Yeah.
So not, and taking the leap that I can outsource some of this stuff. It's never going to be done the way you want. You have to become at peace with that. It's never going to look, sound, be exactly what you want, but it's like done is the perfect, or perfect is the enemy of done.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Like embrace that. So yeah, getting help and being okay with how other people are going to do it. And then the other thing is I didn't understand there was kind of like a checklist for like starting a business with employees. I had always taken for granted that there was an HR system, and that there was employee benefits, and there were
Right.
There were procedures, and there were protocols for how we did things. I took all of that for granted. Somebody somewhere along the way created those systems, and then they passed them along. And when you're in a business, you're part of that ecosystem. But when you start your own business, you have to create your own ecosystem. And it has to be something that you can transfer to somebody else. And so it has to be documented, it has to be written, it has to be recorded, whatever it is that works for you. So that when you do hire new people, they can be onboarded, they can be trained without you having to spend, weeks or months or days doing it.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Yeah. And so like those were things that I really needed to understand, is like creating documentation for my employees, creating the systems for them, and then even just like figuring out like how to do benefits, how to do time off, how do you address like snacks in the office, how do you address like making a beautiful culture, right?
Absolutely.
Like, these are things that I kind of wasn't thinking about, because I was like, no, I'm here to service my clients, not service my employees. And that's when I had to start taking more time to help create a culture for the employees that that they got excited to come to our place of business and participate.
Absolutely. If you're an entrepreneur listening, I think those are some great value bombs here. And I think it's condensed down to realizing that if you're a CEO and you are a 1 or 2 or 3 man show, you're likely a chief everything officer right now. And that's normal, and that's okay. It evolves. And what Shawna's really saying is the systems are so important to have into place from every angle, from a standard operating procedure standpoint, and or just the systems, what happens and when, and being able to delegate is so important. And it's hard. It's definitely hard. Life Nation, if you're listening, you're starting a company and you feel like, but I do it better. You might, but you need to be able to understand that you're likely going to be doing a lot of things better, but you can't do everything. And that's important. And so being able to scale and the law of averages and understand that success leaves clues. You're talking to Shawna here. She's done it. She's been through the process. I've done it. I've been through the process, and understanding that keeping things simple and making sure you're documenting those things that work, and even sometimes those that don't, so you can grow and scale. So that's great advice, Shawna. Thank you. Tell Business of Life listeners that if you were just to give, part with one thing, one piece of advice within your experiences, what would that be?
Just one.
One.
Oh, you're mean.
Yeah, I know it. It's tough. I know.
Yeah. And I'm going to say, understand your North Star. And this is, we've heard this before from so many angles, but it's, I think, the most necessary thing in life, which is to know your North Star, and, call that your integrity, call that your value system, call that your North Star, but know it and preach it and never deviate from it. I call it death by 1,000 cuts. The first time that you deviate from it, you go, well, that didn't hurt very much. It's just like a paper cut. And the second time, the third time, the fourth time, you're like, well, it's, it's okay that I caved in, or that's okay that I didn't want to do that, but I did it anyway. Or, you don't speak up, or whatever the case may be. But by the 10th thousand time, you're bleeding out. And, you no longer know who you are, what you like. It's difficult for you to make decisions because you've forgotten who you are. So, and I think that's true not only in entrepreneurship, but just, being a parent, being a person, being, in a relationship, whatever it may be.
Awesome. That was the last. Life Nation, you've got to remember that in order for things to change, you must change. And in order for things to get better, you must get better. You just got better by hanging out with me, Michael Leibus, and the Business and Life Nation. So come back tomorrow, because I'm here dropping sound bombs 7 days a week, baby. If you'd like to subscribe, please do, so you can take action and execute. See you tomorrow.